Under the same regulations, the Chief of the Inspection Staff will conduct periodic inspections of all CIA offices for compliance with CIA authority and regulations, as well as for effectiveness of their programs in implementing policy objectives. Conduct unannounced inspections of any organizational component of CIA when it appears necessary. Survey and evaluate any problem area or subject called to his attention. Reporting his findings and conclusions as appropriate. PROB Idea Forum, wherein CIA personnel may, on a highly confidential basis, confide grievances or complaints that have not received satisfactory consideration through normal channels of command. Investigative reports from employees or other sources of possible violations of CIA statutory authority. Investigate charges and reports of fraud, misuse of funds, conflicts of interest, and other matters involving misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance, or violation of trust. In all cases involving possible violations of the U.S. Criminal Code, the investigation will be limited to developing sufficient facts to determine if a crime has been committed, and whether prosecution may compromise international relations, national security, or foreign intelligence sources and methods. The results of such investigations will be reported to the General Counsel for further reporting to the Department of Justice. Refer to the General Counsel all matters involving legal questions that come to the attention of the Inspector General. Coordinate with the CIA Director of Equal Employment Opportunity concerning grievance cases. Review with the General Counsel proposals for support of other government departments or agencies. Footnote 49. From CIA Headquarters Regulation. Resuming the reading. Over the years, the principal activities of the Inspector General's office have remained relatively constant. They have been component inspections, investigations into activities which might be construed as illegal, improper, or outside CIA's legislative charter, footnote 50. And the review of employee grievances. Footnote 50. CIA Headquarters Regulation, November 28, 75, 7-1A. Resuming the reading. Subsection. Component inspections. Component inspections are studies conducted by the Inspector General's staff of offices within the agency. They have ranged from specific surveys focusing, for example, on the Technical Services Division in the Deputy Directorate of Plans, to broader surveys such as those conducted on the agency's major proprietaries. They include: end of page 293. Beginning of page 294. Examinations of documents located at headquarters, field visits overseas by members of the Inspector General's staff, and interviews of personnel within the component. Footnote 51. Pausing the reading to read footnote 51. In the past all, or almost all, of the personnel in the component were interviewed. According to the Deputy Inspector General, this was because there were a lot of unresolved problems in the agency that were hangovers from its early days of growth and development. And the feeling then was that a very detailed review of everything was required. Although several former inspectors remarked on the usefulness of this technique, particularly as it improved the morale of lower-ranking employees, see example letter from John 0. Lawrence to the Senate Select Committee, February 18, 76, p. 1, it has now been halted because of the tremendous amount of repetitiveness. And because the interviews were no longer finding things that were startling, but rather the sort of problems that would probably turn up anyway. During future component inspections, there will be selective interviews focusing on management and policy issues. Larger numbers of personnel will be sampled in overseas stations because the inspectors will be looking not only for management and policy questions, but also for operational conduct. Ibid. P7. In the past, the Inspector General also interviewed randomly selected returning field personnel. According to one former inspector, this was useful in alerting the Inspector General to routine problems. The Deputy Inspector General told the committee that the agency had dropped this program but was now reinstituting it. He noted that it had provided useful information, but the information had to be used as leads, as one person usually did not have the whole story. Resuming the reading. As one former member of the Inspector General's staff noted, a component survey should include a review of existing policy, effectiveness and economy of operations, security, compliance with regulations and procedures, adequacy of personnel as to qualifications and numbers, morale, and any specific problem areas identified by the component itself, individuals within it, or external sources. Footnote 52. Pausing the reading to read footnote 52. Letter from Christian Freer to the Senate Select Committee, January 22, 76, p. 2. According to the CIA, the present schedule of component inspections will cover both field and headquarters activities. They should cover all agency components every 2 to 4 years with more frequent attention given to sensitive activities. Footnote 53. The precise schedule for the component surveys is determined by the Inspector General in consultation with the Director. Footnote 54. According to Lawrence Houston, even the scheduling of the inspection is salutary. Footnote 55. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 53. If this schedule were maintained, it would compare favorably to the pre-1973 schedule under which the CIA attempted, unsuccessfully, to review each component every 3 to 5 years. Footnote 54. One former inspector has suggested that the schedule be fixed by the Inspector General, an executive branch oversight committee such as PIB, and the congressional oversight committees, after consultation with the director of the CIA. Another former inspector noted that the tendency was to follow a fixed schedule slavishly instead of keeping generally informed of developments in all components on a continuing basis. Footnote 55. Letter from Lawrence Houston to the Senate Select Committee, 176, p1. Resuming the reading. As one former inspector noted, what the component does in anticipation of the survey and during the course of the survey as problems are surfaced is often of more significance than are the actions taken in response to the report's recommendations. In fact, end of page 294. Beginning of page 295. If the inspectors do their work properly, and if the component is cooperative, there should be little to put into the report of survey. Footnote 56. Pausing the reading to read footnote 56. Letter from Kenneth Greer to the Senate Select Committee, January 20, 76, p1. One former deputy DCI, however, has suggested that the office to be inspected should not be informed. This would, however, eliminate any anticipatory changes due simply to the scheduling. A former inspector has written suggesting consultation with the deputy director involved, as he would know of factors relevant to the timing of the inspection not known to the Inspector General. Resuming the reading. On the whole, it appears that past component surveys increase the effectiveness of the agency. A former inspector described their results as follows. Close scrutiny of any element of the agency by the Office of the Inspector General, preceded by anticipatory review and self-examination within that element. Stimulated useful reconsideration of goals, objectives, and procedures. By providing occasions for all employees in the component to talk freely and in confidence with one or more inspectors, and thus to voice securely any comments, criticism or complaints they might have, these surveys constituted a valuable morale factor. While accomplishing the primary task of bringing to the director's attention the overall performance and possible deficiencies of a given component as well as chronic or developing problem areas within or related to it. Footnote 57. Pausing the reading to read footnote 57. Freer letter, January 22, 76, p1. Resuming the reading. However, the Senate Select Committee's investigation of the Office of the Inspector General found several problems. They include: A. Access to information. On certain occasions in the past, the Office of the Inspector General was denied access to material about particularly sensitive agency activities. In the most striking example, the Inspector General was precluded from even reviewing Operation Chaos files. Footnote 58. Pausing the reading to read footnote 58. The substance of the program, gleaned from overseas inspections by the office, was the subject of a paper by the Inspector General. Consequently, Operation A House was reviewed by the agency's Executive Director-Controller. A second exclusion noted by Scott Breckenridge involved access to materials on an agency proprietary. Resuming the reading. At present, CIA regulations provide that the Inspector General shall have access to any information in CIA necessary to perform his assigned duties. Footnote 59. The CIA has informed the Senate Select Committee that only the Director can refuse the Inspector General access, and such refusal must be in writing. Footnote 60. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 59. H.R. 123. Executive Order 11905 requires the Director to ensure that the Inspector General will have access to material needed to perform his duties under the order. Footnote 60. CIA Memorandum, Comments on the Office of Inspector General in the CIA, January 25, 76, p2. One former inspector suggested that if the Director did choose to deny access to the Inspector General, it should be communicated by the Director of Central Intelligence to the Inspector General in person. Resuming the reading. Thus, even under present regulations, particular agency activities could be exempted from IG review by the Director. If denied access to information, the Inspector General could, end of page 295. Beginning of page 296. Course, resign. The Director should be required, however, to notify the appropriate congressional and executive branch committees of the denial immediately and to provide a written explanation for it. Footnote 61. Pausing the reading to read footnote 61. Under Executive Order 11905, the Inspector General is required to report to the Intelligence Oversight Board on any occasion when the Director instructs him not to report to the IOB on an activity. Subsection B. Problems of emphasis. In the past, as the Rockefeller Commission noted, the focus of the Inspector General component reviews was on operational effectiveness. Examination of the legality or propriety of CIA activities was not normally a primary concern. Footnote 62. According to the current Inspector General, more attention is now being paid to possible improper or illegal activities as well as to the legal authority for any given activity. This change in emphasis should be reinforced by the provisions of Executive Order 11905, which place personal responsibility on the Inspector General for reporting to the Intelligence Oversight Board any activities that raise questions of legality or propriety. Footnote 63. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 62. Report of the Commission on CIA Activities within the United States, June 6, 75, page 89. Footnote 63. Executive Order No. 11,905. Under the order, a similar responsibility is laid upon the General Counsel. Resuming the reading. Subsection C. Discovering potential problem areas. As the Rockefeller Office's activities could be examined. Footnote 64. Reading footnote 64. Report of the Commission on CIA Activities within the United States, June 6, 75, page 89. Resuming the reading. While this is clearly true given subsection D referring improper or illegal activities to the OGC and the DCI, the course of a component inspection. While this is clearly true given the scale and complexity of CIA's activities, the committee found that certain questionable practices which should have been uncovered did not come to the Inspector General's attention during past inspections. For instance, the CIA's project of surreptitious administration of LSD to non-voluntary unwitting human subjects continued from the early 1950s until 1963, but escaped the notice of the Inspector General in 1957, when a broad survey of the division responsible was conducted. The project was discovered by the Inspector General in 1963, the discovery led to its termination. Subsection D referring improper or illegal activities to the OGC and the DCI. The course of a component inspection, these activities were not always referred to the Office of Under the same regulations, the Chief of the Inspection Staff will conduct periodic inspections of all CIA offices for compliance with CIA authority and regulations, as well as for effectiveness of their programs in implementing. When improper or illegal activities were discovered in the course of a component inspection, these activities were not always referred to the Office of General Counsel. During a survey which included a review of the CIA's research program to develop agents which could be used to control human behavior, the Inspector General discovered activities which he labeled unethical and illicit. Footnote 65. Reading footnote 65. CIA Inspector General's Report on the Technical Services Division, 1957. Resuming the reading. Although this language was in his report, he failed to notify the Office of General Counsel and failed to call for the elimination of the questionable practices. In surveys of the CIA's New York mail opening program, the Inspector General reported on issues of management and security, but failed to raise any question about the program's legality with either the General Counsel or the Director, even though the Inspector General knew the program was illegal. Footnote 66. Pausing the reading to read footnote 66. Footnote 66. The IG under whose auspices the survey was conducted believed it was unnecessary to raise the matter of illegality with the Director since everybody knew that it was illegal. And it didn't seem that I would be telling Mr. Helms anything that he didn't know. Gordon Stewart Deposition, September 30, 75, p. 32. End of page 296. Beginning of page 297. The present Inspector General told the Select Committee that the Inspector General does have to be certain that he leans over backward to assure that all reports which might interest the General Counsel are brought to his attention. It is also important that legal advice is sought before a report goes to the DCI or Deputy Director, so that any legal advice becomes part of the report. Footnote 67. Under present CIA regulations, the Inspector General must refer to the General Counsel all matters involving legal questions that come to the attention of the Inspector General. Footnote 68. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Letter from Donald Chamberlain to the Senate Select Committee, January 13, 76, page 4. The CIA has written the committee that when there are legal issues involved in an IG investigation, the formal opinion of the General Counsel is sought and made part of the Inspector General's report to the Director. Comments on the Office of the Inspector General of the CIA, January 25, 76, page 4. It would be possible to require that all IG reports go to the Office of General Counsel, as many of these reports deal with poor management, reorganization, or grievances. This might prove more of a burden than a boon. Footnote 68. CIA Headquarters Regulation 1-3. Under Executive Order 11905, the Inspector General has a personal responsibility to report to the Intelligence Oversight Board any activities that come to his attention that raise questions of legality or propriety. Resuming the reading. Subsection E. Follow-up and implementation of recommendations by the Office of Inspector General. A former inspector noted one phase of the inspection process which he believed needed improvement. This involved getting a decision when the component head non-concurred in a recommendation about which the Inspector General felt strongly. If the recommendation was of major importance, there was no problem, because the Director would decide. However, on recommendations of lesser importance, those not worth bringing to the attention of the Director, there was no really effective mechanism for deciding which view was to prevail. Footnote 69. Pausing the reading to read footnote 69. Footnote 69. Greer Letter, January 20, 76, p2. The IG's office has now established new procedures designed to reinforce the final effect of the inspection report. CIA Memorandum. CIA Inspector General Follow-up Procedures, 1/29/76. Resuming the reading. The present Deputy Director for Operations has suggested to the committee that the DCI should be required to inform the Inspector General as to what action has been taken on his recommendations. Footnote 70. Pausing the reading to read footnote 70. Letter from William Nelson to the Senate Select Committee, January 13, 76, p2. And Kirkpatrick Letter, January 13, 76, page 2. Resuming the reading. Problems apparently have existed not only in obtaining a decision but in obtaining one consistent with the Inspector General's recommendation. As a former Inspector General wrote, it is necessary that the DCI fully back the Inspector General in his recommendations unless there are overwhelming reasons to the contrary. Footnote 71. Pausing the reading to read footnote 71. Kirkpatrick Letter, January 13, 76, page 2. End of page 297. Beginning of page 298. Yet another former Inspector General wrote, I did not feel that the recommendations made in I.GS surveys commanded the attention and support at the Director's level that they merited. Footnote 72. Pausing the reading to read footnote 72. Letter from Gordon Stewart to the Senate Select Committee, January 20, 76, page 1. A former inspector described the principal defect of the Inspector General's office as the absence of IG clout. Holmes Letter, January 19, 76. p13. Another former inspector wrote that if a survey were controversial, as a rule nothing came of the survey report's recommendations. Lawrence Letter, February 18, 76. p2. The present Deputy Inspector General noted that after recommendations are drawn up, the directorates may come back with new information or additional considerations that will modify our understanding of the problem. They may persuade us in their reply that they are right. He also noted that the IG raises the issue, and hopes he explains it.
That last reading was from Breckenridge, March 1st, 76, pages 30 to 31.
He also noted that the IG raises the issue, and hopes he explains it accurately and clearly. But there may be other considerations that we are not aware of that make it impractical, at least at that time. Resuming the reading. A former inspector wrote, "Too often have IG recommendations brushed aside or emasculated as the result of negotiations or pleadings. More unfortunate has been the growing tendency of IG reports to adjust their recommendations to the IG's estimate of what might be acceptable under the circumstances." Footnote 73. Pausing the reading to read footnote 73. Letter from Peter Hyman to the Senate Select Committee, March 18, 76, p. 4. The Rockefeller Commission noted, "The Inspector General frequently was aware of many of the CIA's activities discussed in this report, and brought them to the attention of the director or other top management. The only program which was terminated as a result was one in 1963 involving experiments with behavior-modifying drugs on unknowing persons." Rockefeller Commission Report. Page 89. It should be recalled that the Rockefeller Commission dealt only with abuses. Many IG recommendations have been accepted by the director. Moreover, the termination of programs is not the only measure which can be taken. Programs can be changed, and controls tightened. Resuming the reading. The IG has now been promoted to the same rank as the deputy directors, which may help the Inspector General obtain support for his recommendations. The present Deputy Director for Operations has suggested that if the DCI does not accept a recommendation by the IG be empowered to inform the Attorney General of the United States on matters concerning U.S. law, and the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs on all other matters. Footnote 74. Pausing the reading to read footnote 74. Nelson Letter, January 13, 76, p. 2. The Rockefeller Commission recommended that the IG have the authority when he deems it appropriate, after notifying the Director of Central Intelligence, to consult with the executive oversight body on any CIA activity under Executive Order 11905.
Right before it mentioned the executive order, that was from Rockefeller Commission Report, page 94.
To consult with the executive oversight body on any CIA activity under Executive Order 11905. The Inspector General has a personal responsibility to report to the Intelligence Oversight Board any activities that come to attention that raise questions of legality or propriety. Resuming the reading. Even where the recommendations of the Inspector General are accepted, compliance has on occasion been an issue. The present Deputy Inspector General told the committee about 2 inspection reports in which the recommendations appear to have been accepted, but the compliance was below expectation. In the first case, the IG subsequently headed a general investigation in the area, which had substantial results. In the second, the results of the first inspection. End of page 298. Beginning of page 299. Were minimal, and the staff which had been reviewed eventually was totally reorganized. Footnote 75. Pausing the reading to read footnote 75. Breckenridge Letters, March 1, 76, pp 23 to 25. In order to measure compliance, the IG now requires the component to report on its progress in implementing agreed upon recommendations. Resuming the reading. Subsection F. The scope of the component inspection. In the past, component inspections have, in general, been directed at organizational units presented to the agency's management. Footnote 76, from the
In the past, component inspections have, in general, been directed at organizational units within the CIA, with much less time and attention being focused on programs or issues that cut across organizational boundaries. For example, the CIA's mail opening program was analyzed in part during the Inspector General's survey of the Office of Security, and in part during the Inspector General's survey of counterintelligence issues. Of the counterintelligence staff, but it was never reviewed as a program. Consequently, the issues which the program raised were never fully explored and presented to the agency's management. Footnote 76. And footnote 76 is from the Domestic Report on Mail Opening.
Footnote 76, from the Domestic Report on Mail Opening. Resuming the reading. There are other programs cutting across component lines as well as issues which affect the agency as a whole. These deserve attention from the IG. Although surveys of these have been done in the past, the surveys have not been done on a systematic basis as were component inspections. Footnote 77, from the Lawrence Letter, February 18, 76, page 2. Resuming the reading. Subsection G, detailed reporting versus LSU highlighting. Past component inspections have been detailed and quite thorough. However, the very breadth of the surveys might have made them less useful than more selective reporting. The present Deputy Director for Intelligence, Edward Proctor, noted that in the past IG component surveys have been extremely detailed and involved every aspect of the component being surveyed and interviews with almost every person assigned. To the component. As a result, the reports resulting from these surveys contained a lot of detailed information which was of only marginal utility to the managers of the component or the director. If IG component surveys of the future are to be focused on the important issues and activities of the more sensitive components, I would endorse them fully because they have surfaced some problems for management attention. Footnote 78. From the letter from Edward Proctor to the Senate Select Committee, January 15, 76, page 1. One former inspector noted that some surveys, especially surveys of DDO components, have tended to deteriorate into recitations of unit-by-unit organizational and administrative detail instead of providing programmatic overviews and evaluations and giving incisive descriptions of problem areas with specific recommendations. Hyman Letter, January 18, 76, page 6. Resuming the reading. Subsection H. The composition of the IG survey team. The bulk of the Inspector General's staff has always been rotated to that office from the various CIA directorates for 2 or 3 year tours. In order to have the most qualified personnel, it was, and is, necessary to ensure that the stint with the Inspector General did not damage the individuals. End of page 299. Beginning of page 300. Chance for promotion. Footnote 79. Pausing the reading to read footnote 79. One former inspector has written that the IG had insufficient authority in staff selection and promotion and suggested that he should have the authority to co-opt, subject to approval by the deputy director concerned, any officer for assignment to the IG staff. Lawrence Letter, February 18, 76, pp. 6-7, the present Deputy Inspector General argued against this shopping around the building, stating that rather than using my subjective and personal preferences, which are subject to some errors, I would prefer to have people nominated that I can reject, forcing the Deputy Director to put up new people. Breckenridge Letter, March 1, 76, page 16. Resuming the reading. It is also important that the survey team be unprejudiced. As a response to these needs, according to one former inspector, there was an unwritten rule that if you came from a particular directorate, you would not be asked to work on a team that was doing a survey of any component in that directorate, and that was a hell of a good rule. So that if you were a youngster or not a youngster but somewhere in the middle of your career, with a clear intention that you were going back to your parent directorate after your 2-year tour of duty or your 3-year tour of duty, what the hell do you care if you come from the DDI Directorate for Intelligence and you call them as you see them in CI Counterintelligence Staff. Footnote 80, from the Staff Summary of Joseph Seltzer Interview, 175th, pp. 14-15, see also letter from Thomas Holmes at 10. Resuming the reading. This rule was apparently not always followed. The same inspector said that he believed that an agreement had been worked out between the Inspector General and the Chief of the Counterintelligence Staff, under which every member of the team inspecting the CI staff had a background in the then Directorate for Plans before coming to the Inspector General's office. Footnote 81. One member of that team had actually served as Deputy Chief of the Counterintelligence Staff. Another way to preserve the impartiality of the Inspector General's staff would be to, as one former inspector suggested, make appointments to the Inspector General's staff career culminations with no officer assigned to the Inspector General's staff being permitted to return to another agency post. Footnote 82. While the need for career culminating appointments and more permanent positions in the Inspector General's office were repeatedly suggested, footnote 83, eliminating the rotation system would bar talented younger officers from serving in the office. Footnote 84. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 81. Seltzer, Staff Summary, 175th, p. 14. Present agency policy would not allow an individual to take part in an inspection of his parent office because his objectivity might be affected by his being imbued with its practices, but would allow him to be used in inspections of other offices within his parent directorate. Breckenridge, March 1, 76, pages 18-19. Footnote 82. Hyman Letter, January 18, 76, p. 2. Since Lyman Kirkpatrick, all the inspectors general have taken that office as their last post with the CIA. Footnote 83. See example letters from Gordon Stewart January 20, 76, p. 2, and John O. Lawrence February 18, 76, page 6. Resuming the reading. Another former inspector has suggested that in some cases the composition of the teams did not reflect the expertise needed to analyze. End of page 300. The bulk of the Inspector General's
I'm going to read something. I'm going to start reading from this sentence. While the need for, quote, career culminating in, quote, appointments and more permanent positions in the Inspector General's office were repeatedly suggested, footnote 3, eliminating the rotation system would bar talented young officers from serving in the office, footnote 84. Reading footnote 84. A permanent staff might also mean, as the Deputy Inspector General noted, that the IG staff would have, quote, less and less first-hand experience with what is current in the agency, end quote. Breckenridge, March 1st, 76, page 12. And I'm going to read the last sentence on this page. Another former inspector has suggested that in some cases the composition of the teams did not reflect the expertise needed to analyze. End of page 300. Beginning page 301. Potential problem areas.
The bulk of the Inspector General.
Okay, I'll just read actually the rest of this. So, as an example, he noted that inspection teams in the Deputy Directorate for Science and Technology were composed of engineers and general scientists, and thus might not be qualified to deal with certain questions, such as those involving conflict of interest which might arise. Let me see. A moment.
Pausing the reading to read footnote 85. Holmes Letter, January 19, 76, p2. However the inspection teams are presently constituted, the Inspector General can also request assistance from the audit staff which reports through him to the Director. As the auditors check components, including overseas installations, much more frequently than does the inspection staff, they can be asked to assist the inspection staff in the course of their audits. Resuming They can be asked to assist the inspection staff in the course of their audits. Letter from William Breaux to the Senate Select Committee, January 17, 76, page 4. Resuming the reading. Subsection 3. Investigations into activities that raise questions of legality or propriety. The Office of Inspector General has traditionally examined allegations of questionable activities. Under the terms of Executive Order 11,905, the Inspector General shall Transmit to the Oversight Board reports of any activities that come to their attention that raise questions of legality or propriety. Report periodically, at least quarterly, to the Oversight Board on its findings concerning questionable activities, if any. Provide to the Oversight Board all information requested about activities within. Report to the Oversight Board any occasion on which directed not to report any activity to the Oversight Board by. Formulate practices and procedures designed to discover and report to the Oversight Board activities that raise questions of legality or propriety. At present, CIA regulations provide that any employee who has knowledge of past, current or proposed CIA activities that might be construed to be illegal, improper, or outside CIA, report to the Oversight Board any occasion on which directed not to report any activity to the Oversight Board by. Formulate practices and procedures designed to discover and report to the Oversight Board activities that raise questions of legality or propriety. At present, CIA regulations provide that any employee who has knowledge of past, current or proposed CIA activities that might be construed to be illegal, improper, or outside CIA's legislative charter, or who believes that he or she has received instructions that in any way provide to the Oversight Board all information requested about activities within
the CIA.
Report to the Oversight Board any occasion on which directed not to report any activity to the.
Apologies for this. I'm probably not going to use the AI reader too much, but I'll continue.
Report to the Oversight Board any occasion on which directed not.
Which he was directed not to report.
Report to the Oversight Board any occasion on which directed not to report any activity to the Oversight Board by.
The director.
Report to the Oversight. Formulate practices and procedures designed to discover and report to the Oversight Board activities that raise questions of legality or propriety. At present, CIA regulations provide that any employee who has knowledge of past, current or proposed CIA activities that might be construed to be illegal, improper, or outside CIA's legislative charter, or who believes that he or she has received instructions that in any way appear illegal, improper, or outside CIA's legislative charter, is instructed to inform the Director or Inspector General immediately. Footnote 86. Reading Footnote 86. CIA Headquarter Regulation, January 28, 75, 1-7A. In the past, employees were only asked to provide information about activities in which they were directly involved which might be construed to be illegal, improper, or outside the CIA's legislative charter. Resuming the reading. Thus, all CIA employees are now on notice that they are required to provide either to the Director or to the Inspector General any information which they possess about questionable activities. Footnote 87. Reading Footnote 87. Under Executive Order 11,905, activities which raise questions of legality or propriety must be reported to the Intelligence Oversight Board. In March 1976, George Bush, Director of the CIA, called on CIA employees to report questionable activities directly to him or to the 1G. One former inspector suggested that the reporting of such acts would be facilitated by having a particular inspector designated as a contact point for each major element in the agency. The Deputy Inspector General told the committee that at one time inspectors were assigned to different components.
That last part was from the Freer letter, January 22nd, 76, page 12. The Deputy Inspector General told the committee that at one time inspectors were assigned to, quote, different components, and this didn't work. They got no business, end quote. From Breckenridge, March 1st, 76, page 56. That's the end of page 301, beginning page 302.
As previously noted, the Inspector General's discovery of questionable activities has not always led to their referral to the Office of General Counsel. There can be little disagreement with the recommendation of Lawrence Houston that any question of violation of law or legal authority should be referred immediately by the Inspector General to the Office of General Counsel. Footnote 88. CIA regulations now provide that all matters involving legal questions that come to the attention of the Inspector General shall be referred to the General Counsel. Footnote 89. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 88. Houston Letter, 176, page 2. Footnote 89. CIA Headquarters Regulation, January 28, 75, 7 Law, 7, p. 1. The agency regulations dealing with the reporting of questionable activities only require the IG to refer such reports to the General Counsel when allegations of violations of Title 18 of the U.S. Code are received. While the regulations may reflect a desire not to have to refer disciplinary matters to the General Counsel, example see Breckenridge, March 1, 76, p. 43, the importance of preventing future violations of the law by the CIA compels General Counsel participation in the process of reviewing reports of questionable activities. Resuming the reading. There is one aspect of the Inspector General's role in investigating questionable activities which may cause controversy. The present regulations provide that the Inspector General is authorized to investigate charges and reports of fraud, misuse of funds, conflicts of interest, and other matters involving misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance, or violation of trust. In all cases involving possible violations of the U.S. Criminal Code, the investigation will be limited to developing sufficient facts to determine if a crime has been committed, and whether prosecution may compromise international relations, national security, or foreign intelligence sources and methods. The results of such investigations will be reported to the General Counsel for further reporting to the Department of Justice. Reporting of the fact of a crime will not be delayed for an evaluation of whether prosecution will raise questions of national security, as outlined above. If both reports can be made at the same time without delay, they may be so reported. Footnote 90. Pausing the reading to read footnote 90. CIA Headquarters Regulation, 1-3. In certain instances in the past, the Office of Security has investigated individual allegations. Breckenridge Letter, January 12, 76, page 3. Prior to the decision in Miranda v. Arizona, 384 U.S. 436, 1966, the Inspector General conducted complete investigations of alleged violations of law by agency employees. After the decision, in order to protect individual rights and to avoid compromising future prosecution, the Inspector General limited his investigations to the determination of whether a crime had been committed. Resuming the reading. There is an obvious need to ensure that a prosecution does not jeopardize important United States interests. The IG appears to be well suited to evaluate its effect. It should be remembered that confidence in the judicial system is important, and it can be undermined if people believe that individuals are exempted from prosecution solely because of their connection with the intelligence community. Conducting preliminary investigations to determine if a crime has been committed may, however, raise difficult issues. Great care must be taken so that later and fuller investigations will not be hampered. The level of care must be such that there can be no suspicion that agency officials have failed to impartially investigate allegations of wrongdoing. End of page 302, beginning of page 303. By their colleagues. Footnote 91. To prevent suspicion, it might be desirable for the Inspector General to maintain a list of allegations and the results of the IG's preliminary investigations for periodic inspection by the Department of Justice and the appropriate congressional committees. Pausing the reading to read footnote 91. It would be possible for any information, allegations, or complaints of violations to be referred to the Department of Justice immediately, without a preliminary investigation by the Office of the Inspector General. This might, however, result in a substantial number of unfounded complaints being referred to the Department of Justice. As the present Deputy Director for Operations wrote the committee. There are in any organization individuals who are quick to allege misconduct or improper activity on the part of their superiors or peers. The question as to whether these allegations have any substance can best be initially determined by the Inspector General. Immediate referral to another body will result in harassment-type investigations, will in certain cases broaden the security damage, and even eventually result in poor follow-up on real charges when enough other cases have proven to be unsubstantiated. Nelson Letter, January 13, 76, page 1. Resuming the reading. Subsection 4. Investigation of grievances. CIA regulations provide for the airing of grievances through the normal chain of command to the Director of Personnel and finally to the Director of Central Intelligence Agency through the Inspector General. In addition, The regulations direct the Inspector General to provide a forum for grievances which have not received satisfactory consideration through the normal channels and empower him to accept direct appeals when appropriate. Footnote 93. In certain circumstances, this grievance machinery may facilitate the detection of illegal or improper activities by agency officials. Footnote 94. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 93. CIA Headquarters Regulation, 20-7. Footnote 94. CIA Headquarters Regulation, 1-3. Resuming the reading. It is agency policy that relief first be sought in the chain of command, footnote 95. But direct recourse to the Inspector General is available where an employee feels he cannot go through normal channels without jeopardy to his career, or other rare exceptional circumstances. Footnote 96. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 95. Holmes Letter, January 19, 76, page 11. Footnote 96. Memorandum from Scott Breckinridge to Chief, Review Staff, March 17, 76, page 2. Resuming the reading. This direct channel for the airing of grievances should be maintained with the IG being provided the authority to counter the possibility of reprisal against the employee. Footnote 97. The mechanism might be more heavily publicized. Footnote 98. Because of the importance of having a mechanism outside the CIA, employees should be aware that they can go to the appropriate congressional oversight committees. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 97. Holmes Letter, January 19, 76, p. 11. Footnote 98. The present Deputy Director for Intelligence has recommended that the normal chain of command grievance procedures be publicized, and the Inspector General instructed to resist the temptation to get involved prematurely in grievances. Proctor Letter, January 15, 76, p. 7. One former inspector has noted that whenever an employee challenges the agency itself, as contrasted to a component or an agency official, he is also challenging the Inspector General, since the latter is necessarily a representative of the agency. Thus, the Inspector General cannot be an impartial arbiter between the agency and the employee. This was a source of frustration to employees who brought such cases to the Inspector General. Such employees should have an external administrative appeal available either in addition to or as a bypass of the Office of Inspector General. Lawrence Letter, February 18, 76, p. 7. End of page 303. Beginning of page 304. Section C. Internal and External Review of the Office of the Inspector General. The Inspector General reports to the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Director has the primary responsibility for evaluating this office. The office has not, however, been regularly or formally reviewed. Some mechanism for internal inspection of the Office of the Inspector General should be devised. The Inspector General was aware of questionable activities, some of which continued for many years with the approval of the agency's top management. This underscores the importance of outside reviews of the agency. To be effective, the reviewing bodies must have access to the Inspector General's work. A number of individuals familiar with the work of the Office of the Inspector General have argued against the Inspector General's having a direct reporting responsibility outside of the CIA. Lawrence Houston noted that if the Inspector General reported directly to anyone other than the Director, two crucial elements would be lost: first, the absolute candor that should exist in his relations with the Director, and second, the ability to protect the integrity of his files and the confidentiality of his findings and recommendations. Footnote 99. Footnote 99 is from the Houston Letter, 1//76, page 1. Resuming the reading. The committee has also been told that any arrangement which would separate the Inspector General from his present relationship to agency management would tend to result in a lack of candor and a resistance to revealing sensitive details in investigations, and this would inevitably result in diluting the authority and effectiveness of the Inspector General. Footnote 100. Pausing the reading to read footnote 100. Comments on the Office of the Inspector General, January 25, 76, pp. 2-3. However, Scott Breckenridge wrote that if so directed by the Director of Central Intelligence, elements being inspected will continue to be as forthcoming as in the past. There is no reason to expect that this will not be the case. Breckenridge Letter, January 12, 76, p. 5. Mr. Breckenridge noted, however, that if reports were to be made available to outside bodies, less detail might be provided in support of conclusions and recommendations. Resuming the reading. A start in outside reporting has been made. Under Executive Order 11,905, the Inspector General must report to the Intelligence Oversight Board any activities that raise questions of legality or propriety. Footnote 101. Pausing the reading to read footnote 101. Ibid. Prior to the issuance of the Executive Order, CIA regulations, amended to conform to the recommendations of the Rockefeller Commission, required reports to be sent to the NSC and FIB. Resuming the reading. But executive branch oversight of the CIA or the CIA's Inspector General is not sufficient. The Inspector General should be available to the appropriate congressional oversight committees. Footnote 102. Pausing the reading to read footnote 102. Letter from John McCone to the Senate Select Committee, January 30, 76, page 2. Former DCI McCone wrote that the IG should not report to anyone outside the agency such as the FIB, the NSC, or congressional oversight committees. The IG should be, however, available to all of these groups. Ibid, page 2. Resuming the reading. And some form of reporting on the work of the Office of the Inspector General should be made, with appropriate safeguards, to the appropriate congressional committees. The present Inspector General believes that THI.G. could and perhaps should provide our oversight committees with the following: 1. A summary of our findings on each component survey, one which would reveal problems. End of page 304. Beginning of page 305. And recommended solutions but not give operational details. 2. A semi-annual summary of all other cases, emphasizing trends, general problems, etc., but not giving names of individuals or sensitive details which might identify individuals. Footnote 103. Pausing the reading to read footnote 103. Chamberlain Letter, January 13, 76, p. 4. In order to reinforce the chain of command, such reporting could be done via DOI's reports to the oversight committees. Resuming the reading. Such reports, coupled with access, where necessary, to the results of particular inspections or reviews by the Inspector General, would greatly aid congressional oversight of the CIA. Footnote 104. Pausing the reading to read footnote 104. One former inspector argued against congressional access without the DCI's concurrence as leading to congressional involvement in agency minutiae, the erosion of security, and the reduction of the candor of agency employees vis-a-vis the IG. Hyman Letter, January 18, 76, p. 2. Another former inspector wrote that if all IG's reports were to be sent to Congress, they would become less candid and more conservative. Lawrence Letter, February 18, 76, p. 5. Another former inspector suggested that an active and strong congressional oversight committee would be my first choice as an outside authority which would correct problems that the IG discovers. Holmes Letter, January 19, 76, page 6. Resuming the reading. Congressional evaluation of the work of the Office of the Inspector General might be facilitated by requiring the Inspector General to provide the Oversight Committee with a plan of action setting out priority surveys to be done and why, the schedule to be followed, the dates reports would be completed, and the actions taken on reports, or the non-actions, and why. Footnote 105. Pausing the reading to read footnote 1.
Footnote 105. Holmes Letter, January 19, 76, page 12. The submission of such a plan would allow the IG to be evaluated on the basis of his own plan, which would be approved by planning to do what the committee expected them to do. End quote. IBID. The IG is required under Executive Order 11905 to report to the Intelligence Oversight Board the, quote, practices and procedures, end quote, formulated to discover questionable activities by the CIA. Resuming the reading. A second means for Congress to oversee the work of the Inspector General would be to make the Inspector General subject to presidential nomination and senatorial confirmation. Presidential appointment, however, might inadvertently give position of Inspector General a political coloration which would diminish the effectiveness of the office. End of page 305, beginning page 306. Chapter 14, the Department of State. And I'm going to stop this recording here.